Hi, I'm Neha Matthews, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. "4.5%, a number we're going to be hearing and seeing a lot of in primetime debates and think pieces for the next few weeks. On Friday, the GDP figures for quarter two, which was July to September, were released. At 4.5%, India's GDP growth continues to be the lowest it's been in more than 6 years. The economic slowdown has lasted longer than was expected, and the government needs to find smarter ways to tackle it. In fact, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman addressed the slowdown in the Rajya Sabha just a few days before the GDP numbers were released.
If you're looking at the economy with a discerning view, you see that growth may have come down, but it's not a recession yet, or it won't be a recession ever. And therefore, yes, ma'am, I did say that. So, consciously, all of us have to rise above, because economy also has a very big foundation in sentiments.
On this episode, Udit Mishra, who writes on the economy for the Indian Express, and Ishan Bakshi, who is part of the editorial team, join me to discuss what could be done to boost the economy. For one thing, is Nirmala Sitharaman right? Is India not facing a recession?
Well, recession has a specific definition, which is that your GDP has to contract for 2 successive quarters. So until that happens, we are not in a recession. We are still growing. It is just a matter of worry that our rate of growth has been decelerating. So instead of growing at 8%, 9% that we would want to grow at, if not a double-digit number, we are now growing at 4.5 in the last quarter. And for the last few quarters, it has been a secular decline in the rate of growth. So it is a matter of massive worry for us, and we should bother. But the talk of recession is incorrect.
The question is, had our economists expected the slowdown to last this long?
If you go back, much of the economic commentary in India, I think, underestimated the slowdown and underestimated how deep and widespread it was. If you look at the RBI's estimates of growth, they've been scaling them down continuously over the last 6-7 months. Their last estimate was of the full year growth at 6.1%. And now with 4.5 in Q2, we essentially have about 4.75 growth in the first half of this year, 4.75, 4.8. So now it makes it very difficult to achieve even the scaled down growth of the RBI at 6.1. So you're going to probably see the RBI and the MPC revise their forecast even further. I mean, most private economists have lowered their forecast for growth for the full year.
In the last few months, in fact, Fitch Ratings slashed India's GDP growth forecast for this financial year from their earlier 6.6% to 5.5%. Moody Investor Services downgraded theirs to 5.6%. But as Ishan points out, the GDP rate doesn't even map the informal sector, which forms the backbone of the Indian economy. According to an International Labour Organization report last year, 81% of Indians are employed in this informal sector.
So these numbers typically capture the formal economy more accurately than the informal economy. So because we don't have that many data indicators and sources for the informal economy on a monthly, we don't really map that more accurately in short periods of time.
Yeah.
We have NSS surveys which tell us every 3 or 4, 5 years how the informal economy is doing, but over short periods of time, very difficult to map. You have some proxies like wage growth and food prices and all that,
which also we know is bad.
Are doing very badly. So coming to this point, I mean, we are now seeing the slowdown is becoming more intensified. It is possible that some date, a couple of months, you may see some sectors picking up. It would be premature to think that that would be a pickup in growth, right? I mean, we have too far many problems in the economy to see that happening in the near future. You had, say, 3 shocks. One was demonetization and was GST. And then was this both put together and the government's push towards formalization. So that would have affected the informal economy a lot. So, but it's very difficult to know how the informal economy is shaping up right now.
So we know the economic slowdown is lasting longer than expected, but which sectors in India are feeling the impact?
The data would now show that it's widespread. It's across sectors. So like today's data itself, if we look at the gross value added for different sectors, agriculture is the only sector which has remained stagnant over the last quarter. All other sectors, barring government, have actually decelerated. And manufacturing, which is the big hope that we will be able to create jobs and absorb excess labor from agriculture, has actually contracted by 1 percentage point. So it is across the board. It's whether you are involved in construction, trade, hotels, transport, real estate, financial, professional services, mining, quarrying, any of the utilities, gas, water, across the board, your incomes, your value addition is decelerating every quarter. So it is intensifying, it is widespread, and government can only prop it up to a certain point, after which either we'll have to simply bid goodbye to all notions of fiscal responsibility, or else I don't know. I mean, it's quite bizarre.
Now, what Udit pointed out about government spending, that it's propping up the economy, is important. Without taking that into account, the economic picture is far grimmer. And government revenues are feeling the hit. So what now?
If you look at the data for this quarter, it's essentially been driven by government spending. If you remove government spending, your growth is even lower. And that's a very worrying part, right? The problem going forward is that this slowdown is going to affect government revenues. It already is. Data from April to October, if I'm getting this correct, shows you that your gross tax revenues of the government, central government, grew by 1.2%. That's it. If you compare to the budget estimates, there's a huge gap that is now showing up in government revenues. Now, one way to balance its books and to meet the budgeted fiscal deficit target would be to cut expenditure. But if government spending goes down, your growth also goes down, your slowdown intensifies, right? The government can say, okay, fine, we will deviate from the path of fiscal consolidation and we will spend what we had planned. How would that happen? That will happen by borrowing more money. Now, borrowing more money essentially will lead to more government supply in the bond market, right? And that will lead to higher interest rates and hardening of interest rates. And you're essentially offsetting the rate cuts by the Monetary Policy Committee. So this is a catch-22 situation of what to do next. And you have the MPC meeting next week on the 5th of December, if I'm not mistaken. And now the onus is really on them right now. They've cut the rates by 135 basis points. Not much has happened. They've moved to a new system of external benchmarking in the last couple of months. So now the MPC, which meets on Thursday or Friday next, has a situation of growth substantially deviating from its own projections. So what does it do? It's been cutting rates. So I would argue that there's a case for a very strong, aggressive cut, given the slowdown and given that it takes a certain amount of time for the interest rates to work through the system and to lead to lower costs for you and I.
Around end September, among the slew of other measures that the government was taking, they also slashed corporate tax rates in a bid to boost supply. But Udit points out, supply really isn't our pressing issue right now.
This is a consumption-driven slowdown. Its consumption is falling. That has got a real hit. And most of the efforts that the government has taken, in particular the corporate tax cut, which is a fantastic move, but it's making the supply better or making it more conducive to supply more. But what about the demand? So demand is the issue. And we've discussed this in the past also, that either you spend more and create new jobs or create economic activity, or you cut taxes, either income tax, or my preferred option would be GST cuts. Did you cut GST? Yes, there'll be a hit on your fiscal balance, but a GST cut perhaps would be the best way to create demand. If people are just on the edge wanting to buy more and they are waiting for prices to come down, then perhaps GST cut would do it. If the consumption does not pick up, for example, just imagine for a scenario where you cut rates and the consumption doesn't pick up still, then you are really stuck. You have already exhausted your monetary levers and consumption is still not gone and the fiscal levers are already overextended. So this is a good time And I'm just giving a different prescription because people should know that there is another option. The option could be that because inflation is higher because of food prices, that if in case the monetary policy committee doesn't think that a big rate cut is warranted, then the government should do something, either spend more, but I don't generally believe in government spending more. If at all, it should throw the onus back on the people, cut taxes and not income taxes because there are smaller number of people giving income taxes, cut GST, bring whatever consensus you have to get from all the states, and cut GST sharply to boost consumer demand. If it still doesn't go up, then we are looking at a very different odd scenario. Then we are even at a worse place.
The question remains, is the government doing enough? And is it doing it smartly?
I remember writing this whole thing about structural changes from the start of Modi regime. And there were books that came out when Mr. Modi took over in 2014, saying that India has had enough of policy paralysis and here is the whole list of structural changes that we need. But there is a time and place where you do it. There has to be some cushion. The data is suggesting that that cushion is not so much. You need some very direct intervention. Even say bank consolidation, bank mergers right now. It would have in real ways, in real manner, slowed down economic activity. If you merge 2 or 3 banks, they're more busy figuring out a common identity and rules and processes than actually serving the economy. So it's not whether a particular move has been right or not. I think essentially the timing of the government's policy measures has also been wrong. Apart from saying that there is a distinct sense of denial in accepting that there is a problem. Even today, I hear all this discussion. I mean, the last conversation that the FM had was that we're still not in recession. So it begs the question, are we waiting for that? I remember Jaitley had said that we are the only country which is doing well in the world at one time. Yeah. But, fastest growing major economy and stuff. And all the time editorials were being written saying that, that can go away. You need to keep doing enough to ensure that that record stays. If you do not, then that will go away. And it's very evident now that it's slowly just undermining the viability. So it's important to, first of all, admit that there is a slowdown. 2, what is the nature of the slowdown? It is not a supply one, it's a consumption one. And then do whatever you can now with the limited levers and the space that you have, policy space, either on monetary side or on the fiscal side. There's limited policy space. There's only so much you can cut on interest rates because transmission is already pretty lousy. And there's only so much you can expand or take a hit on the fiscal side in either spending more or cutting taxes. But then if you have fewer bullets, then make sure that they work. They go exactly to those sectors, to those areas which really need the boost. There's no point right now counting how many MG hectares have been sold, how many Mercedes have been sold, because that's not the sector which is worst affected. Exactly. There are all sets of data which show that the broader economy is really struggling. 2 rupee shampoo sachet not being sold should worry the government and its analysts far more than some 240 Mercedes being sold. Because the 2 rupee sachet not being sold portends a much wider bunch of people, a much bigger population afflicted by a slowdown.
So no, India is not facing a recession, but it is struggling with an economic slowdown, which will only get worse if it is not acknowledged, and acknowledged fast.
If you arrest a slowdown when it is starting, you require less firepower compared to a situation months down the line when the slowdown is intensified, right? If you needed 100 rupees to solve a problem at the beginning of the slowdown, you will need much more firepower at the end of it. So there's always sense in addressing the slowdown when it is starting, right? Rather than not acknowledging the problem and letting it fester. And situations like the NBFC, right? Not resolving that head on and waiting for it to turn around on its own is an example of just that.
This is where political economy comes up. the NBFC problem happened well before the general election. But in the lead up, in the last 4 or 5 months, if you accept as a government that things are falling apart or things are going wrong, it could be seen as it would be detrimental for you, your political interests. However, if you remain blind to it, or at least pretend that nothing wrong has happened, you've also given that same problem another 5 months or 6 months. So Mr. Modi has got re-elected in a quarter where the growth was the lowest of 6 years. That was his re-election quarter. Now, the point is not that whose fault is it. The point is, when we talk about economy in hardcore analytical terms, we say if you have a problem, quickly acknowledge it and arrest it. But political economy sometimes can undermine that whole. We are in the 6th year of this government. At some point, that statute of limitations will expire. At some point, you'll have to stop saying what the previous government did wrong, and you'll have to answer, why didn't you do anything in the last 6 years?
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.